Moving out in space, what would it take to be self-sufficient at Mars?
To be self-sufficient on Mars, it's really about the total tonnage that is delivered to the surface of Mars. So you can say like, well, I think it's probably on the order of 1 million tons, maybe more, but somewhere between probably 1 million tons and 10 million tons are needed to make Mars self-sufficient.
And how many rockets is that?
Well, I gave a presentation on this recently, if you've looked at my recent SpaceX talk. But if you have 100 tons per flight, you need 10,000 flights to get to 1 million tons. And that's 100 tons landed to the surface of Mars. So in order to get 100 tons landed to the surface of Mars, you need five times that number in Earth orbit. So we do a lot of orbital refilling. So launching sort of rockets, tanker ships over and over again that would replenish the propellant of the ships that would go to Mars. And then you'd need roughly an order of 10,000 of them to get to 1 million tons. But we plan to do that. That's what we think we can get that done within 20 years.
Really? So when do you think we'll be there for the first time?
The first Starship that will land on Mars, which obviously will not have people at first, I think is probably within about 5 years. And then it would probably launch several ships and just confirm that they can land okay on Mars. We'll also be doing the moon simultaneously with that. So I think we'll get people back to the moon, I should say, within 5 years, and we'll get uncrewed ships landed on Mars within 5 years. And then we'll be building up the production rate and improving the design of the booster of the ship. So in the first people on Mars, I think within 7 years or so, 7 to 9 years. And from there, we need to rapidly increase. We need massive numbers of ships going. And Earth and Mars only in the same quadrant of the solar system, roughly for 6 months every 2 years. Or at least it's only possible to really transfer efficiently from Earth to Mars. I say every 6 months, but really there's a couple months where it's ideal every 26 months. So every 2 years that you would see basically a fleet depart Mars. And I think it would be quite a spectacular thing to see 1,000 ships depart from Mars all at once, like Battlestar Galactica.
What kind of new technology do we need before we'll be self-sufficient here?
Actually, I think we have all the tech. We already know all the technology that's necessary for that. We just need to build. No new physics is needed for this.
Why is it so important for you?
I think it's important for consciousness in general. So if we wish to maximize the lifespan of consciousness, then being a multi-planet species will result in a much longer existence of consciousness than if we are on one planet. If we're on one planet, we're simply biding our time until there's eventually a calamity. It could be soon, it could be a long time, but eventually something will happen. It could be a global thermonuclear war. It could be simply that civilization merely subsides. Our civilization may not die with a bang, it may die with a whimper, just gradually falling into obsolescence. But if we're a multi-planet species, then we've got 2 planets, and they can support each other. And we can go beyond 2 planets, ultimately to the moons of Jupiter, beyond to the outer parts of the solar system, and ultimately to other star systems. So this tiny candle of consciousness that we have in this vast darkness can be extended and amplified, and we're just far more likely to survive for consciousness to survive if we are a multi-planet species.
You don't think it'd be better to use all these resources and try to sort out Earth?
Well, just to put this in perspective, the amount of resources I'm talking about for making life multiplanetary would be less than 1% of all resources on Earth. So really you can think of it as resource allocation. Do you think it's worth spending 0.5% of Earth resources to ensure that we have redundancy in consciousness and that we extend consciousness beyond Mars to other planets, to Mars and other planets, and ultimately other star systems? And then also take into account the fact that there's certain things we simply cannot avoid on Earth. Like, is it within your power or mine to stop World War III? I don't think so.
No.
If it happens. And if we have global thermonuclear warfare, our technology level will drop to the Stone Age, and we may never survive. And then we maybe get hit by a comet, like the dinosaurs. And if the dinosaurs had spaceships, they'd probably still be around. So, and then if you wait long enough, the sun will continue to expand and eventually engulf Earth and destroy it, and destroy all life. So just to give it a certain amount of time, no matter what you do on Earth, no matter how careful you are, all life on Earth will die. That it will happen is a certainty.
You're becoming like a real geopolitical force, and a really important one. How do you look at that?
Well, like I said, I'm trying to take the set of actions that maximize the probability that the future is good. I mean, we have to keep civilization going onward and upward as much as possible, and try to minimize the civilizational threats that occur. Like, we can't get to Mars if civilization collapses. It's not going to happen. So, we've got to keep civilization going. And I think we should view our civilization as being much more fragile than we think. We kind of take for granted, oh, it's always going to be there. But actually, if you study history, you realize that there's rise and fall of civilizations. I mean, I was reading in depth about the ancient Sumerians, who were arguably the first civilization, if you call civilization like writing and stuff. They were the first to develop writing, but eventually they died out and they were gone. So, and then nobody could read their writing at all, and they were just faded out as a civilization. But they're pretty impressive in their time. And the ancient Egyptians, the same thing. And one after another. Ancient Greece had its day. China and India will have incredibly impressive populations. But there's been ebbs and flows in the China and Indian civilizations over the aeons, the millennia as well. So, I guess I'm just trying to take this set of the steps that increase the scope and scale of consciousness. That's what I'm trying to do. It's not that I'm trying to have a political thumb on the scale or anything like that. But I think I'm trying to have the political will go where the people want it to go.
Yeah.
And,
You mentioned some really smart people here, and kind of just moving tack a bit here to corporate culture. Now, you manage a lot of geniuses in your companies. What is the key to manage really smart people, you think?
I don't think I manage smart people. They manage themselves. I think I guess with really smart people, I don't really think of it like managing them. I think that if somebody is very smart and talented, they can go anywhere and do anything, anytime. Like if they don't have to work with me, they could go anywhere. So I really just say, like, look, this is the goal we're after, and this is what we're trying to achieve. And do you agree with this goal? And if you do, then let's try to get it done. And provide my opinion along the way. But it's very rare for me to actually sort of insist on a particular thing. Once in a while, I'll say, look, guys, you just got to trust me on this one. We got to do this thing. And if it turns out to be a bad decision, you can all hold that against me in the future.
But you have an incredible eye for detail, right? I mean, when we read the Isaacson book, it's pretty clear that you really are deep into detail and know what you talk about. So how do you balance this kind of micromanagement of some areas and then delegate other areas?
I wouldn't call it micromanagement. It's just insisting on attention to detail. That if you're trying to make a perfect product, you must have attention to detail is essential. And I haven't actually read the Isaacson book.
You should. It's very good, actually. I loved it.
Well, I asked Walter Isaacson if I should read it, and he said I shouldn't. So then, then he said I shouldn't read it. So.
Okay, well, I'll ask you some questions from the book then. He talks about the kind of the hardcore and ultra hardcore culture. What is an ultra hardcore culture? I guess it's working culture, right? I mean, ultra hard work. How hard is that?
Well, when things get really intense, you're basically just working every waking hour.
And how long can you do that for?
I've done that continuously for sometimes like a few years.
What does it do to you?
It's pain. And every waking hour maybe is an exaggeration because there are a few hours, obviously, with friends and family and critical other things. But 100-hour weeks would be, I've done many, many stretches of 100-hour weeks, like true 100-hour weeks, where roughly 6 hours per day is sleeping. I would not recommend that. This is not, that's for emergencies, It's not all the time. During very difficult times at Tesla, I've had to do that. And sometimes at the beginning of my earlier startups, I did that, where I just wouldn't leave the office. I would just sleep under my desk and just work 7 days a week. Sometimes it's necessary for success or to avoid failure.
But do you enjoy being in this crisis mode?
No, I don't. It sucks.
Okay.
No, I don't want to be there. It's pain. But sometimes it's the difference between success and failure.
When you make decisions, how important is speed?
He just gave me an idea, which is I'm going to invite the judge, Alexander, to do a spaces. And then he can explain why what I'm doing is bad and maybe he's right. I challenge him to a spaces.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
But what about speed? When you make decisions, how important is speed? And how do you balance analysis with your gut feel?
I think the best offense and defense is speed. If you think of something like the SR-71 Blackbird, it really had almost no defenses except accelerate. And it was never shot down even once. Like, I think over 3,000 missiles were shot at the SR-71 Blackbird and none hit. And really what it did was just go faster. So the power of speed is underappreciated as a competitive dimension.
Is that why, SpaceX, for instance, has been so successful? Because you've been mean and lean as an organization and fast?
I think speed is definitely a factor. Now, I should say, you want to go, in the case of a company, you need to be a vector, not a scalar. So it can't be, you need to go at high speed in the right direction.
Sure.
So it can't just, and no company is going to be going in the right direction all the time, so you have to do course corrections. Like a guided missile, you order course corrections. And, but in the case of SpaceX, it's like, okay, our goal is to extend humanity beyond Earth. And we didn't even know how to even frame the question correctly. Like, we just knew that was the general goal. We didn't know what propellant we'd use or what the raw materials would be or how would the rocket be built, how would it be designed, what's actually important. And, so for example, going from our Falcon architecture, which uses refined jet fuel and liquid oxygen in an open cycle gas generator architecture engine to Starship, which is a liquid methane, liquid oxygen propellant, a staged combustion, very high pressure engine. That's a big architectural change. But we didn't know that we needed to make that architectural change until we were pretty far down the road. Like about halfway, it took us about 10 years to figure out that was even the right architecture.
Now, I think SpaceX is one of the best examples I know about what we call failing well, right? Learning from mistakes and moving on. Generally, how do you look at mistakes? I mean, which ones do you tolerate and which ones don't you tolerate?
Well, I think I don't really think of it that way. The first 3 flights of SpaceX failed. The fourth one succeeded. And if the fourth one had not succeeded, we would have gone bankrupt. We would have had no money left. So it was a very close call. But since then, SpaceX has done very well. It's now the Falcon 9, knock on wood, is the most reliable rocket in the world and launches about every 2 to 3 days. Now,
last question on risk. What are the types of risks you would not want to take?
Well, I think in terms of risks, you don't want to take risks if you only want to bet the company risks if they're absolutely necessary. So there have been a few times where, say, with Tesla, we just had no choice but to bet the company. Because if we're doing a new vehicle program that is an order of magnitude larger than the past one, then we're just unequivocally betting the company because the new vehicle will be 90% of production. So going from the original Roadster to the Model S, original Roadster was only, about 700 per year. Then Model S was 20,000 per year, and then Model 3 is sort of half $500,000 per year. Model Y over $1 million per year. So these are all bet the company vehicles, but the reason we could do, for example, the Cybertruck, which was kind of a radical new design, was because it wasn't a bet the company decision. So it was like, okay, look, let's try something. I want to try something totally crazy. It's like, what truck would Blade Runner drive?
Is that the one you're going to drive on?
Yeah, I think it would be perfect for Mars. But we could try something where there's some chance that people might not like it, but it's radical and new, and it's aesthetically it's not derivative. It doesn't look like anything else on the road. Whereas all the other sort of pickup trucks look like vague copies of one another. There we could afford to take a chance on failure and say and chalk it up to, well, we tried to do something interesting. But actually, by the way, the Cybertruck's doing great. So, but one of the things that I think is important for innovation is that you do accept failure. Like necessarily, you have to always look at the incentive structure of an organization and say, is that organization properly incenting innovation? And if you do innovation, you're necessarily going to uncharted territory. So there are going to be some mistakes. There are going to be some failures, and you have to for SpaceX rocket engine development. I keep telling the team, look, if we're not occasionally blowing up an engine on the test stand, we're not trying hard enough.
How important is research and PhDs and that kind of stuff? I think I've seen somewhere you think most PhDs are useless.
Well, I think most PhD theses are useless, which I think is actually objectively true. If you look at how many PhDs are created every year and how many of those papers are actually used in anything, then objectively, most PhD theses have very low utility, or maybe zero, because nobody uses them. So once in a while you get something that is spectacular, but it's pretty rare.
Perhaps something more useful, and in the book that you haven't read, talks about your love for gaming, in particular like strategic ability gaming. And I've been thinking quite a lot about it. What have you learned from those games, and have that learning and wisdom been helpful when you have been planning your companies?
Yeah, it's hard to say exactly what I've learned from video games, except that I do like playing video games as... If I want to take my mind off work, I'll typically play a very hard video game.
Such as which one?
Well, over the years, it's been many, many different video games. So, when I was a little kid, it was like, Pong and the little tank games and things. And if you take a game like, for example, Civilization, it's actually it tells you how civilizations are formed. Like I remember playing the original Civilization with the technology tree and how you invent different things. You'd like invent literacy and invent democracy and invent gunpowder. All these things that and you start to realize, oh wow, there are stages to technology. Like you can't actually get to democracy without literacy. And so there's these stages of technology development or stages of ideas that that's a helpful framework for a company. And I guess in like I say in recent years, there was a game I played that was actually developed in Sweden called Polytopia, which is actually quite a good game. People like playing chess, but I think chess is not a great. There's not a lot of transfer learning from chess to the real world, because in chess you've got only 64 squares. It's a set piece battle, same pieces every time. There are no terrain differences. There's no technology tree. There's no fog of war. But say a game like Polytopia has all of those things: random terrain generation, the differences in attack and defense bonuses depending on what type of terrain. You've got 16 tribes, I think, each with different abilities. You've got a technology tree that you can choose to develop in different ways, and you've got, of course, fog of war. So that I think is much closer to reality. So I think Polytopia. I mean, I was playing Diablo for a while, which is pretty fun. Diablo at high levels gets very complicated. You could call it like a spreadsheet with a game attached. So that's and I briefly got for about a day the world record in this abattoir of Zir on a 4-person team of clearing the hardest level, which was not bad for someone who's like 53. Basically, we'll be 50 soon. There is still some Twitch element to it, and it's hard to beat kids at games with a Twitch element. But yeah, I find these games interesting. If you can be fully immersed in a game, it's great.
Now, what is the score now in terms of the union in Sweden and the collective bargaining?
Actually, I think the storm has passed on that front. I think things are in reasonably good shape in Sweden. So yeah, I think things are good overall. Yeah, I feel pretty good about the future. I mean, there's going to be bumpy quarters from here and there, but I think the long-term future of Tesla is extremely strong. For example, just a last question here: what do you want your legacy to be? I don't mind if my legacy is accurate or inaccurate, provided that I die feeling that I've done the right thing for the future of consciousness. So just trying to have this light of consciousness last as long as possible, and maybe understand more about the nature of the universe or simulation or whatever this is. I have a philosophy of curiosity, which is to understand the universe, understand the nature of the universe, or even what questions to ask. I would say I would subscribe to the Douglas Adams Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy school of philosophy, that we're trying to understand what questions to ask about the answer that is the universe. Okay, I think that's a good place to end. For sure, the life on this planet would have been a lot more boring without you, and so I'm glad to spice it up a little. Totally. All right, well, it's good talking.
So what I'm going to go through tonight is the overall sort of path to making life multiplanetary. So we're doing a lot of good things at SpaceX. I mean, Starlink is incredible, providing connectivity throughout the world, and also, paying for a lot of what we're doing here. And Falcon 9 is the primary launch vehicle for Earth, just doing more non-SpaceX launches than anything else. And but Starship is Starship is the first design of a rocket that is actually capable of making life multiplanetary, where success is one of the possible outcomes. No rocket before this has had the potential to extend life to another planet. And I'll sort of wax esoteric here for a minute, because this may sound sort of unusual, but when you think about the question of where are the aliens, which I get asked a lot, this is like the Fermi paradox. Where are the aliens? And I've not seen any evidence that there are aliens on Earth. A lot of people think there are aliens on Earth, and I'm like, great, I'd like to meet one. You know, for a while there, when I was getting my green card and everything, it said alien registration card. I'm like, okay. But this question of where are the aliens is, I think, a very profound one, because I'm aware of no evidence of aliens whatsoever, which means that I think we're probably alone. And if you look at the history of Earth, like how long has Earth been around? Assuming that physics is correct, the universe is about 13.8 billion years old. Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. When you think about how old is civilization, I think the right measuring point for civilization, in my view, or a good measuring point, would be the advent of writing. So the first writing is generally considered to be the ancient Sumerians. Where are they now? They died out, but about 5,500 years ago. It was archaic pre-cuneiform. In fact, I suggest it's like an interesting rabbit hole to read about the history of writing. So if you consider, say, like, okay, civilization, I think if you don't have writing, you kind of need writing for civilization. So it's only been around for like a little over 5,000 years out of 4.5 billion years that Earth has been around and the 13.8 billion years of the universe. So all of human civilization is basically the blink of an eye. It's like just a fraction. It's nothing. And I think that probably means that consciousness is incredibly rare, and perhaps fleeting. It may not last for very long. Because otherwise I think we would have seen aliens, some kind of sign of aliens. I think the most likely explanation is that consciousness is so rare that does that consciousness actually extend to another planet? Does that consciousness extend to another star system? I mean, ultimately, if we're able to become a spacefaring civilization, a multi-planet species, and ultimately a multi-stellar species, and go out there and explore all these star systems, I think we may find that there are many long-dead one-planet civilizations. And as you've heard me say before, we don't want to be one of those lame one-planet civilizations. I mean, we want to be a multi-planet civilization, ultimately be a multi-stellar civilization, be out there among the stars. Like, you know, make science fiction not fiction forever. Kind of make Star Trek real. So that's why I think that there's this high urgency to making life multiplanetary. Because this is the first time in Earth's 4.5 billion year history that it's been possible to extend life or consciousness beyond Earth. And we've got to do that while civilization is still strong. So that's the overarching goal of the company, is extend life sustainably to another planet. Mars is the only option, really. And to do so, ideally before World War III or some kind of bad thing. The key thing is that we need enough people and enough tonnage on Mars such that Mars can survive and continue consciousness even if something would happen to Earth. Now, I still think, obviously, I'm not talking about abandoning Earth or anything like that, and we want Earth to be as good as possible for as long as possible, but there are certain things that may be outside of our control. So we want to just get Mars to be a self-sustaining civilization as quickly as possible. And I think this can be done in around 20 years. So, and this giant Starship factory that we're building is obviously key to that. And the launch sites that we're building here and at the Cape and elsewhere in the future will be key to that. So let's just go through that. Congratulations, guys. You did that. That's insane. I mean, it looks like CGI. I mean, it's hard to believe that that is unfiltered video. That's just the actual what the camera saw. No filters, no nothing. That's actually what the camera saw, which is insane. So, you know, you're doing incredible work that I think almost no one thought would actually happen. So it's wild that this strange spot, we're basically on a sand spit by the Rio Grande, near the beach. And that is actually the gateway to Mars. Has to be like, if this was a movie, you'd be like, no way. Come on. Too implausible, but it's real. And it's due to you guys. Congratulations. This is a side-by-side of the 3 flights. You can see how thrust to weight improved significantly. So we've made tremendous progress from Flight 1 to Flight 2 to Flight 3. And we got Flight 4 coming up in about a month or so. And with Flight 4, we should, if we get, if fate smiles upon us, we'll get through the high heating regime and smash into the ocean at a controlled spot. And then hopefully be able to also do this with the booster, land on essentially a virtual tower. If the landing on the virtual tower with the booster works, then we will actually try with Flight 5 to come back and land on the tower. No. That's very much a success-oriented schedule, but it is in the realm of possibility. But I would say, like, the odds of us actually being able to catch the booster with the Mechazilla arms this year, I think, I don't want to tempt fate, knock on wood, but I think the odds of actually catching the booster with the tower, probably like 80, 90% this year. Which is insane. Like, actually, when we first talked about it, it sounded so batshit crazy. We're going to have a giant, it's like literally bigger than Mechazilla from this movie. That you'd catch like the biggest flying object ever made with mechanical arms out of the air. But we're going to do it. So, yeah. It may not work, necessarily the first time, but it will work. So really, Starship is really the key to making life multiplanetary and preserving the light of consciousness. That's what it's all about. And it may end up being the most important thing that we ever do. I think that like the light of consciousness is like this tiny candle in a vast darkness, and that candle has only been lit for a very short time, and it could easily go out. So we obviously want to preserve the tiny light of consciousness on Earth, but extend it to Mars, and then ultimately to the rest of the solar system, and then start going to other star systems. And I mean, I won't be alive to see that, but unless I'm like frozen or something, I don't know. But I think at some point we will discover many civilizations that maybe lasted 1 million years, or 2 million years, or 10 million years. But a civilization that lasted 1 million years, which would be, vastly longer than our civilization has lasted. I mean, that's only the third decimal point, so like 13.8 billion something years. If your civilization lasts 1 million years, it's only goes, that third digit past the decimal point goes up 1, and that's 1 million years. So I mean, I'd say, like, we should think of, like, how do we make civilization last 1,000,000 years? You know, we often get caught up in, like, the day-to-day things, but we want to have at least 1,000,000-year civilization, if not 100,000,000-year civilization, or a billion-year civilization. So, absolutely crucial to that goal is becoming a multi-planet species. People often ask why Mars. Well, there's not a lot of options, frankly. So, Venus is a superheated, high-pressure acid bath. So, not what you don't want to go to Venus. And then the Moon is close, but it doesn't have an atmosphere. The gravity is only 1/6 that of Earth, and it's missing a lot of key resources. So, also the insulating value of the Moon relative to Mars is much less. So if there's something that takes out Earth, like let's say there's a World War III, global thermonuclear warfare, they'll probably throw a few nukes at the Moon. So, whereas it's way harder to shoot Mars with nuclear, and Mars would see it coming and probably have some time to stop the inbound missiles. So the value of Mars, the difficult, or the distance and time required to get to Mars, actually has an insulating benefit for the continuation of consciousness, even if there's something terrible happens on Earth. And then once we go beyond Mars, there's some asteroids like Ceres, some of the moons of Jupiter. Starship would ultimately be capable of reaching anywhere in the solar system. And then we'll need something, a new level of technology to go to other star systems. But if we can't at least get to Mars, then other star systems are hopeless. I mean, it's a fixer-upper of a planet. Okay, it needs some work, but it is, it's really the only option for becoming multiplanetary. And long term, we can warm up Mars, and we can densify the atmosphere, and there'd be a liquid ocean on about 40% of the surface. So we could make it an Earth-like planet long term. So, let's see. We've learned a tremendous amount from when we started the company, and at first we're unable to get even a small rocket to orbit, to now where we've done 327 successful launches, almost 300 landings. In fact, give it a few weeks and we'll have done 300 landings. 261 reflights. So, I mean, many times I was told that that reusability was impossible, and even if you did it, there would be no point, because nobody would want to fly rockets that much. But now we routinely fly and land the booster, and we recover the fairing. So we've learned a tremendous amount from the Falcon program that is then feeding into the Starship program. And Falcon and Starlink are what obviously keep the company going. So I'd just like to give a hand to the Falcon team for the incredible work that they're doing. And then Dragon. Wow, 45 launches of Dragon. It's amazing. And we've flown 50 crew members to orbit, 46 to the space station, and everyone has come home safely, which is the most important thing. So, incredible work by the Dragon team. So let's give them a hand. That was, couldn't ask for a better outcome. And Starlink, actually, if you look at the sort of the plot of all the satellites going around Earth, this looks kind of scary, actually. But there's 6,000 satellites in operation, over 6,000, and 10,000 lasers, almost 3 million customers. So Starlink is doing a lot of good for people on Earth who either don't have internet access or it's very expensive, and so it's doing a lot of good, on Earth. Because when I say we want to be a multi-planet species, we obviously want Earth to be as good as possible, and Mars to be great. So Starlink is doing a tremendous amount of that, and we're learning a lot by having this big fleet. Starlink will also be very important for high bandwidth communication to and on Mars. So from a tiny rocket to Falcon 9, which is a much bigger rocket, many iterations of Falcon 9, and then Falcon Heavy, and then Starship. And Starship will get bigger, obviously. This year, if things go according to plan, SpaceX will do probably 90% of all Earth mass to orbit. And then China will do about 6%, and the rest of the world will do about 4%, which is pretty wild. And then once Starship is flying, we'll be doing over 99% of all Earth mass to orbit, which you kind of have to do in order to build a city on Mars. And I should say we'll also build a lunar base as well, so it might as well along the way. So you can see that actually Falcon 1 was really, half a ton to orbit. I think we slight error on the slide there. So Falcon 1 was about half a ton to orbit. Falcon 9, depending on in expendable mode, would do probably 25 tons to orbit. Falcon Heavy, probably 70. Anyway, these are just obviously rapidly increasing numbers. And Starship in its final configuration or its final form will probably do well over 200 tons to orbit with full reusability, and be able to fly multiple times a day. So I'm pretty confident we will achieve that this year. Like I said, probably 80–90% this year. And then there's recovering and reusing the ship. The ship will take longer. So the ship, I think we will want to have at least 2 consecutive successes of a given design that land at a specific point in the ocean or smash into a specific point of the ocean before we try to bring it back to the launch site. Because we do not want to rain debris over Mexico or the U.S. So my guess is probably next year is when we will be able to reuse Starship. But I think it's highly likely that this year we will bring Starship to, or the ship side of it, to a controlled point in the ocean, and have it basically land on a virtual tower somewhere in the Pacific or the Indian Ocean. And we've already proven that we can do the final phase of landing, so coming from sort of a belly-first position to rotating the ship and landing vertically. We proved that right here. So we just need to be confident that we can get through the high heating portion of the of reentry reliably, and then we will bring the ship back and it will land on the tower as well. And we're going to build more Mechazillas. So there's going to be 2 launch towers here, and then 2 launch towers at the Cape as well. So we'll have 4 launch towers for Starship, probably by sometime next year. So we're aiming to have the first Cape launch tower and launch system operational around the middle of next year. And that'll be important for launch azimuths that are sort of fly over land. So I think what we should probably expect is that we do the kind of the development launches here, test anything new here, build the rockets, and then probably most of the operational launches would be from the Cape. So this year we're planning to build another roughly 6 boosters and ships, and that production rate will increase a lot next year. That's why we're building the giant factory. Ultimately, we'll need to build a lot more ships than boosters, especially for Mars, because it's you'll actually want to use the ship, take apart the ship and use it for raw materials on Mars, because the ship materials will be so valuable. Most of the ships you wouldn't want to bring back. You'd want to just use them for raw materials. Eventually, we will want to bring ships back, and I think we want to give people the option of coming back because they're more likely to want to go if there's some option of coming back. But I think most of the people that go to Mars will probably never come back to Earth. So, and we'll need to ramp production to pretty high numbers. Like, I think ultimately probably a ship but multiple ships per day, basically. And then next year we're aiming to demonstrate ship-to-ship propellant transfer. It's hard to make this not look a little bit naughty, because it's 2 ships connecting and doing a fluid transfer. It's just what it is. But this is actually a very important step on going to Mars, because you need to get the ship to orbit and then do orbital refilling, kind of like aerial refueling, and that's really you need about 5 or 6 refilling missions for every 1 mission that goes to Mars. So roughly 5 to 1. So, and this will also be very important for the Artemis program for the NASA to get back to the moon. So we'll want to have a ship that is, well, it's going to be a specialized ship for the moon, like this. So the moon, obviously, there's no Mechazilla, so we need landing legs. And you don't need a heat shield, and you don't need flaps, because there's no atmosphere. So the moon ship would be specialized. Now ultimately, I think we want to build a moon base Alpha, and have a permanently occupied base on the moon. Like, that would be super exciting. And so you'd have a bunch of ships that are specialized for going to and from the moon, but they never come back to, they never land back on Earth. They just would dock with propellant tankers to get orbital refilling. So in terms of performance, we've made dramatic progress on every level for Starship. It's remarkable that you can see the Raptor engines and how it has evolved from, optimistically 185 tons to 280, and I think ultimately the booster engines will aim to get the booster engines over 330 tons of thrust, which would mean 10,000 tons of total thrust at liftoff. So, and then the Raptor 3 also will not need a heat shield. So Raptor 3 looks very simple, and it is actually simplified in a lot of ways. But a lot of the complexity is hidden because we have integral cooling channels in many parts of the engine that don't exist in Raptor 2. So in order to not have a heat shield, it has to be very resilient. But that is actually what Raptor 3 would look like. Raptor 3 looks like it's missing a bunch of parts, but actually those parts have either been deleted or they've been integrated into the system, and like I said, with integral cooling channels. And where you need secondary plumbing, the secondary plumbing has also been integrated into the pump and into the chamber jacket, and yeah, so it's much simpler. Well, it's actually extremely difficult to build Raptor 3, but it will be easy to integrate and will have higher performance and lower total mass, and be more reliable. So. Well, that can go on for a while. So I find it interesting to look at if you look at the flame tail on Starship and how long it is. It's a very long flame tail, which is due to the fact that the chamber pressure, well, it's just outputting a lot more gas at a higher velocity. But I think the flame tail is like maybe 1,000 feet long. It's like more than twice the length of the rocket. And that will actually get, as we increase the thrust, that will get longer. So, yeah. And inevitably, the rocket grows in height. So Starship 2, we're aiming for, like currently Flight 3 would be around 40 or 50 tons to orbit. So the current design, Starship 2 will be over 100 tons. And then Starship 3 will be over 200 tons. Yeah, it's going from around 7,000 tons thrust to over 8,000. But I think we'll end up ultimately with more than 10,000 tons of thrust, probably 7,000 or 8,000 tons of liftoff mass, and at least 10 meters taller. We'll see. Tends to grow. Yeah, exactly. So it probably grows a bit more than that, even, really. So if you look at Falcon 9, we're not going to do the length to diameter of Falcon 9. That would be crazy. But Falcon 9 is a very long rocket, so I suspect it'll probably get a bit longer than this. But at 200 tons per flight, fully reusable, that is pretty incredible. And yeah, this will be on the order of 500 feet tall. And then there's thousands of design improvements here. So. I mean, I think maybe one of the most profound things is Starship 3 will cost less per flight than Falcon 1. So that's the difference between if you've got a fully reusable rocket or an expendable rocket. The fully reusable rocket with low-cost propellant and autogenous pressurization actually costs less than a tiny expendable rocket. So, and it'll do, like I said, Falcon 1 is about half a ton to orbit. The Starship 3 will be 400 times more payload for less than the cost of a Falcon 1. Ultimately, I think we might be able to get the cost per flight to Earth orbit down around $2 million or $3 million. So these are sort of unthinkable numbers from the, nobody ever thought that this was possible, but we're not breaking any physics to achieve this. So this is within the bound, without breaking physics, we can do this. So the Mars missions are 2 years apart, or 26 months. If you look closely at the Starlink router, you see the Hohmann transfer from Earth orbit to Mars orbit. And that's basically to say to people, the Starlink system that you're buying is helping get humanity to Mars. I think it's pretty cool. So roughly every 2 years, thousands of ships would depart from Earth to Mars. It would look like Battlestar Galactica, but in a good way, hopefully without being chased by the Cylons. But it would be an incredible thing to see these thousands of ships departing every 26 months for Mars. What this diagram is basically saying is that for getting to Mars, we would essentially create a kind of a propellant depot ship. The propellant depot would look more like a hot dog than like a sphere. It's really just a long ship with a lot of insulation. And we'd fill that ship up, and then shortly before, or as they're going to Mars, the ships would take off with, I don't know, a couple hundred tons of payload from Earth, reach orbit with almost no propellant, and then get refilled by the tanker, and then go to Mars and land, go all the way to Mars with over 200 tons of useful payload. Then on Mars, in the beginning, I think we would simply reuse the ship materials, so most of the ships wouldn't come back, but then over time, you'd want to bring the ships back so you could reuse them. And for that, we would need to create methane, CH4, and oxygen, O2 on Mars, which you can do with H2O and CO2. So the atmosphere is CO2, and there's plenty of water ice, H2O. And so it's kind of like tailor-made for, well, actually, the reason we have a methane oxygen system is because you can make methane and oxygen on Mars fairly easily, like just not a total walk in the park, but the ingredients are readily available to create methane and oxygen on Mars. So you build a propellant depot and bring the ships back, and build out as quickly as possible a self-sustaining civilization on Mars. And we want to get the cost of going to Mars such that almost anyone could afford it. So, like if somebody were to just work hard on Earth, save up, and that they'd be able to go to Mars. So it's like anyone, ideally, almost anyone could go to Mars. And I think you'll see a lot of governments also sponsor people, and ultimately we'll want to get, so there's kind of an optimal landing zone on Mars where you have resources, so you've got access to water or frozen water, that you're not too close to the poles, so you can use solar power. It would be nice to use nuclear. I don't know if we'll get the approval, but nuclear would be very handy on Mars because you can use the heat, and you can generate electricity. So, and then you kind of want to be about 2 kilometers below sea level. So if Mars did have an ocean, you'd actually be quite deep in the ocean, at least at first. Yeah, so let's see. That's Mars. Kind of want to land about halfway between the pole and the equator, in a kind of a deep area of Mars. The deeper it is, the more you can use the atmosphere to brake, and the atmospheric density is higher. So these are all the things that would have to be developed. Sometimes people ask me, are we developing these things? I'm like, not yet, because this is the cart, and we need the horse first. So the rocket is the horse, and then this is the cart. But ultimately, we'll need all these things, lots of power generation, mining in general, ice mining, propellant production, long-duration life support, a lot of construction, and then global communication. So I think this would open up a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurs that want to create things on Mars, whether that is a propellant. Well, I think we'll have to do the propellant depot, but whether it's like iron ore refining or a pizza joint or a bar, there'll be an opportunity to do all the things that we like on Earth on Mars. Like a Mars bar would be, great. So I think probably a rough order of magnitude guess for what you need, how many people do you need for a self-sustaining city is about 1 million, and several million tons of cargo. So, yeah, which we can do, and we can do this in 20 years. But like I said, in order for it to be self-sustaining, you actually need the entire base of industry. You can't be missing any element. So that's really what's going to take a while is, do you have everything you need to survive on Mars? At that point, the future of consciousness is assured. So if you do 10 launches a day at 200 tons per launch, 1.5 million tons to LEO per opportunity, you net that out to 250,000 tons to Mars per opportunity. So that means you can get to 1 million tons in about 8 years, since the opportunities are 2 years apart. So I think it's pretty doable, and I'm like, we're actually going to do this. We are actually going to do it, which is insane to think. So millions of tons to Mars. Yeah. Wow. And we're going to build a lot of vehicles. So, yeah, several thousand vehicles per year is what we'll need. Which really quite doable, actually. It sounds like a lot, but it's very doable. Yeah, if you compare it to sort of car production, it's a small number. Of course, this is much bigger than a car, but even if you look at the total tonnage, it's still very doable to build several thousand vehicles a year. So that's what we need to do, and we're going to do it. And then long term, we'll probably have some offshore launch sites. You can just imagine all of these starships waiting in orbit for the planets to align, and then this gigantic star fleet taking off from Mars. All right, so we're actually going to do this. When you think about where this started out, this was literally just like a sandbar where we're standing right now. And now look at what we've done here. And we've gotten 3 flights off of Starship, and we've got a fourth one coming up. And we're building a gigantic factory that will be able to output a massive number of ships. So it's surreal, but it's real. So we're actually going to do this. We're going to take humanity to Mars. And I'm confident you can do it. So